News Network.
Washington Journal continues.
Welcome back. We are discussing the strikes against Venezuela overnight and the capturing of Venezuelan President Maduro. We have a news conference that is scheduled by President Trump at 11 a.m. Eastern Time out of Palm Beach, Florida. We will be providing you with live coverage of that. And we are extending today's Washington Journal and taking your calls and reactions up until that time once that news conference gets underway. We are going to go back to the calls now to Guy in Maryland, Democrat. Go ahead, Guy.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you.
This wasn't on my Christmas wish list. Two things. Franco, Stalin, Mussolini, Hitler, we'll skip over 100 smaller ones, Putin and Trump. It came up, what's Trump's strategic plan? Where in the history of the world has the strongman model ever worked out for the average citizen? It's always chaos and a stack of bodies in its wake. We have to decide whether we're going to be a nation of laws or not. Trump plays it up to the edge on some things, like today. Now this is an act of war, without a doubt, but we're doing it under our laws of it being a law enforcement action. So there's one guy from the Coast Guard or one guy from the Department of Justice on the boat to cover it all up. Trump, somebody said something about Trump not having a strategic plan. He does have a strategic plan. It's Project 2025. They're disemboweling our government, our ability. We're no longer going to collect facts. So as many arguments as we have on every day on C-SPAN amongst ourselves from people who all have one thing in common, their love for this country. He's taken away our ability to gather facts where we could be confused or wrong or just have a different opinion. We don't even have a baseline to operate from. The man is a con artist.
All right, Guy. And this is from the BBC. What President Trump said this morning on Fox News, he said, quote, "We were going to do this 4 days ago, but the weather was not perfect. The weather has to be perfect. All of a sudden it opened up and we said, go." He adds that when they captured Maduro, he was, quote, "in a house that was more like a fortress than a house, with solid steel all around." Reiterating that he doesn't think any U.S. soldiers were killed, Trump adds, quote, "A couple of guys were hit, but they came back and they're supposed to be in pretty good shape." Also, Venezuelan President Maduro and his wife are traveling to New York after being captured by President Trump. That's what he said to Fox News. He adds that the pair have been indicted in New York and will travel to the state via helicopter and ship. Quote, "They killed a lot of people and a lot of American people, even people in their own country." Let's talk to Jonathan in Philadelphia, Independent Line. Hello, Jonathan.
Yes, good morning. Sorry I wasn't able to get with the previous guest just to discuss some of the things she was saying. This country has a long history of wars, lots of wars, and lying about those wars. Vietnam would be a great example. The Gulf of Tonkin, that's declassified now. That war started over lies. This war seems strange. When you run into a country and you grab the leader, you're bombing boats, you're seizing oil tankers. I mean, those are all clearly acts of war. And so I'm very worried about why we're targeting Venezuela. Linking it with sort of narco things doesn't make sense, because why aren't we doing this to other countries then? Why aren't we? So this seems to be very specific to Venezuela. So again, previous callers said the logic didn't sort of follow. And the other thing I'm really worried about is the journalism. I know that C-SPAN likes to say that it's democracy unfiltered. That's very laughable. You guys pick the guests very well. We get very, very pro-corporate, pro-billionaire points of view, and then you get a smattering of callers with, dissent. But in general, that's a worry. I don't think we have journalists anymore. I think we have sort of chained, uncurious dogs. You know, they think they're free, but they just don't pull very hard on the chain.
So, Jonathan, where do you get your news from?
Oh, well, certainly I do watch C-SPAN. I do like hearing from callers, but I often go to independent sources. I like Chris Hedges. I really wish you guys would bring on Chris Hedges. I mean, if you guys, again, want to talk about, you know, international law, following legal experts, we would not be going after Venezuela right now. We would be going after Israel. We wouldn't be supplying Israel with weapons. We would be making sure that they get tried in a court for breaking laws against war crimes, famine, using famine as a war tool, indiscriminate bombing of urban areas, the mass killing of children and women. That's what we would be doing. So I find it very, very, very I would almost say anti-Semitic of this country, anti-Semitic of C-SPAN and the news media to prosecute a war against Venezuela when Israel is actively doing war crimes, has not had a ceasefire, and there was never a war. That was just always a land grab by Israel, and Israel is in 6 other countries.
Got your point,
bombing.
Jonathan. Here's Joe in Tampa, Florida, Republican. Hi, Joe.
Hi, good morning. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you.
Thank you. Amazing to me the foolishness I hear on sometimes here. No better example than the nitwit you just had on there. I mean, just the fact that the diversity of opinions you guys have is a joke compared to his statements that, you know, you're some kind of left-leaning deal. But in any case, even beyond that, my point is that in our country, you know, people need to really do a little bit like I've heard some of the previous callers talking about, and that is to make sure that they do some of their own research. You know, it's unfortunate in our country there's almost like a triad. There is the media, there's no doubt, is very left-leaning. Okay, you'll have the Democrats, the media is carrying the water for them. And, you know, in our country, unfortunately, the higher institutions of learning have also become extremely left-leaning. So people need to look and see. I mean, look at the number of millions of peoples and families that have been destroyed in this country by drugs. Even the individual reporter you had on a minute ago is talking about, oh, well, we're not sure that the drugs are working their way into this country. Are you kidding me? Come on. At the end of the day, when that large number of, I don't care if it's not fentanyl. That's the new talking point by the media. It's not fentanyl. Well, I guess heroin and other opioids, it's okay for that to come in here, but there's no proof there's fentanyl. It's ridiculous.
All right, Joe. And we got this from Senate Majority Leader John Thune. He posted on X a few minutes ago. For years, Nicolas Maduro, the cartel he leads, and other cartels in Latin America have trafficked drugs into the United States, which have killed hundreds of thousands of Americans. President Trump's decisive action to disrupt the unacceptable status quo and apprehend Maduro, it continues, but we don't have it. And we will go back to Pat, who's calling from New York, on the line for Democrats. Pat, are you there?
Oh, good morning. Sorry, I was listening to the other comments. I'm listening to people call in and saying, Happy New Year. But the times that we're living in now is uncertainty. Uncertainty causes fear. And with the things that's going on, with the wars we're involved in and the wars that we seem to be creating, will this come back on us as retaliation? The name-calling that goes on with the disagreements and agreements with the people, Republicans, Independents, and Democrats, I think that's truly uncalled for. That's what's going on now. There's no more morals or scruples in the politics we in today. Will this cause of these wars that we continuously get involved in, will this create a bad place for America and cause us to go into World War III? We're involved in so many things that we shouldn't be in, and that's all I have to say.
And the New York Times has this. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said in a statement that he was alarmed by the events in Venezuela on Saturday and warned that the U.S. military action there would have wider implications for the region. Quote, independently of the situation in Venezuela, these developments constitute a dangerous precedent. he said, calling for international law to be respected. That's at the New York Times. John, Akron, Ohio, Independent Line, you're on the air.
Yes, Mimi. I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to talk to your guest also, but I listened to several calls after that. Are you there?
Yes, we're listening.
Hello? Oh, okay. Mimi, and so she defended her allegedly narco-terrorist boats. Why would you call Maduro the president when he is the illegitimate president? He lost. Do I understand it? Correct me, Mimi. Is he not was he elected legitimately, or is he an illegitimate president?
So obviously his critics and most election watchers said that he did not win that election fairly.
Oh, just a watcher? That's not an official thing? Because your callers called in, and they said, and they think Trump should be impeached. Trump won the majority of Americans' votes. Maduro did not win the votes. We're not in there for regime change. The Venezuelans, they picked their president, but they didn't get it. Who won? The girl that won the Peace Prize. Is that correct, Mimi?
Yep.
The girl won the Peace Prize. She was elected president. Right?
And take a look at this. So this is on the BBC. It said, asked if he will support opposition leader Maria Corina Machado, who is currently in Norway, to take over Venezuela, Trump tells Fox News, quote, we're going to have to look at it right now. Quote, they, Venezuela, have a vice president, as you know. I don't know what kind of an election that was, but, you know, the election of Maduro.
Are you talking to me now?
No. I'm reading to you. So listen. The election of Maduro was a disgrace. That's from President Trump. It says Maduro's capture, quote, sends a signal that we're not going to be pushed around anymore. He alleges the U.S. is losing hundreds of thousands of people a year to drugs, adding, quote, we're not going to allow it anymore with this. Okay, go ahead, John.
Thank you. So his vice president, what makes an illegitimate president's vice president legitimate? Come on, Mimi. The vice president is not legitimate either, right? He's not going to take the whole regime. You call it regime change. The population of Venezuela decided this. Now your guest came on, and she's from CNN, right? CNN owns C-SPAN, and previous callers.
Sorry, that's not true. CNN does not own C-SPAN. Deborah in Ohio, Republican line. Go ahead, you're on the air.
Yes, good morning. So one of the things that I love reading history and trying to understand our nation. And something that people are missing is just that. And if you go back to the Monroe Doctrine of 1820, and I'm sorry I didn't get to talk to the guest about this, because she mentioned something about how we've neglected the Western Hemisphere. But we clearly had defined our role as a nation in the Western Hemisphere. We did it in 1820 in the Monroe Doctrine. But what's more important is we did it again in 1947 with the Truman Doctrine. And if people were to read the Truman Doctrine, I think they would say, well, basically what we're doing is carrying out what we have decided as a nation.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Sorry. Were you going to say something, Deborah?
I was going to just say the Truman Doctrine was approved by our nation and our representatives and everything. And it wasn't like they were ignorant. We had just finished World War II in 1945. So the people that approved of this doctrine, our nation's, people at the time, they had just come out of World War II. So they were very well.
Deborah, let me ask you, the Monroe Doctrine, you said 1823. It says that the European powers, according to Monroe, were obligated to respect the Western Hemisphere as the United States sphere of interest. And that's at archives.org if you want to read the whole thing. But what does that mean to you, Deborah, as far as that the Western Hemisphere is the U.S.'s sphere of influence? What does that mean the U.S. can do in the Western Hemisphere?
Well, it means that we have to be watchful and participate, and just like what we did in Venezuela this weekend. It means that we have a stake in what goes on in the Western Hemisphere for the security and for the well-being of the Western Hemisphere.
All right. Here's Ray in Fayetteville, North Carolina, Democrat. Good morning, Ray.
Good morning. Good morning. Look, people, you're missing it. Okay, remember back here when the Republicans was supposed to have a meeting about a strategy to how to combat the Epstein files. This is their strategy. Deter. You understand what I'm talking about? It's sad that so many people had to die for them to try to distract the Epstein files. Keep your eyes on the prize, people. The prize is the Epstein files.
All right. And this is Chris in Washington, D.C., Independent. Hi, Chris.
Hey, good morning. Thank you for taking the call. I had a comment and a question for the professor, but I'll ask them both anyway. So one of the callers just mentioned Truman. And in 1948, after World War II, Truman changed the presidential seal so that the eagle faces the olive branch instead of the arrows. And he said, from this day forward, we're a nation of peace. But Trump changed the Department of Defense back to the Department of War and said we're now a nation of war, I guess, in a retrospect instead of peace. But my question was for the professor, if it is being spun as a law enforcement action, why is the U.S. military involved? We're not a law enforcer DOD. That should have been the UN. I hope that's maybe asked at 11. Why did we go at it alone? Because when we do, it makes it look like an invasion or a regime change instead of, a law enforcement action. So those are my comments, and thank you for taking my call.
Mason in Eureka Springs, Arkansas, Republican. Mason, good morning.
Good morning to you. I believe that President Trump has done exactly what he set out to do. We had a problem with immigrants, so he closes the border. Then we have drugs coming into the United States. He attacks the boats. Then we're not getting any results to the satisfaction. So what he does, he goes in and he gets the guy who automatically needs to come back to the United States because they had warrants out for him. So I don't understand why everyone's so upset over the fact that all we did was hunt down a crook, bring him to trial, and now we're going to see what's happening. So I disagree and agree with a lot of folks that have said stuff here, and I really appreciate you taking my call. Been trying to get through on this line for 3 months.
Wow. Thanks for continuing to try, Mason. And in case you're wondering why we're still here, past 10 o'clock, we are extending today's Washington Journal in light of last night's events in Venezuela. To get your reaction, there is a news conference that President Trump has called, and we will be covering that live, scheduled to start at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. So do stay with us for that, and you can continue to call in and let us know your thoughts on what your reaction and your opinion on Venezuela. Kathy, Fort Edward, New York, Democrat, good morning.
Good morning. I would just like to know how he feels he has the right to do what he did. How would Trump feel if his family was taken? Do you want families to be involved in this so-called war? I don't. Thank you.
Guy in Jacksonville, Florida, Republican line. Good morning, Guy.
Good morning. I'm with you.
Yes, go ahead.
I'm sorry that this whole situation has occurred only from the standpoint of not trying to stop drugs, but I'm concerned more that the Chinese are going to take advantage of this in Taiwan now when they see how busy we are in Venezuela and South America. I just don't want to see another war start that we have to stand behind on the west coast of to try and protect Taiwan if China sees this as their opportunity to do what we're doing now in Venezuela. So whether drugs are the reason or not, I don't want to see this expand. Thank you for taking the call.
Richard in Kansas, Independent line. Hello, Richard.
Yes, ma'am. First of all, I would like to say I have cable TV, and I watch this thing. It's called Nat Geo, to catch a smuggler. And for over a year now, I've been watching this Trinidad, Tobago, and the United States Coast Guard. It's kind of like a reality show. They take you on these boats and they show you what their operations and what they're doing. And they were intercepting these. They actually have a name for them. They call them go-fast boats. And they were catching about 20%, 2 out of 10 is what the show was saying. And I'm just wondering if the lady from CNN ever watched that show, because this isn't something new, these go-fast boats. This has been going on. Now, when you
So,
put
Richard,
an
I just want to
embargo,
correct. She is no longer with CNN. She's an independent global affairs journalist.
Yes, that would be true, but CNN doesn't hire anybody that doesn't have a political agenda.
All right. And from our C-SPAN archives, here is President Trump during his address to Congress. This was his 2020 State of the Union address, and he did talk about the Maduro regime, and he praised the opposition leader at the time, who was Juan Guaido.
Supporting the hopes of Cubans, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans to restore democracy, the United States is leading a 59-nation diplomatic coalition against the socialist dictator of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro. Maduro is an illegitimate ruler, a tyrant who brutalizes his people, but Maduro's grip on tyranny will be smashed and broken. Here this evening is a very brave man who carries with him the hopes, dreams, and aspirations of all Venezuelans. Joining us in the gallery is the true and legitimate president of Venezuela, Juan Guaido. Mr. President, please take this message back to your family. Thank you, Mr. President. Great honor. Thank you very much. Please take this message back that all Americans are united with the Venezuelan people in their righteous struggle for freedom. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you very much. Socialism destroys nations, but always remember, freedom unifies the soul.
That was almost 6 years ago. That's from our C-SPAN archives. Our current opposition leader is Maria Corina Machado. This is the headline of the New York Post. Venezuelan opposition leader, 2025 Nobel Peace Prize winner Machado, poised to take the place of Nicolas Maduro. She is 58 years old, currently in Norway. Here is Mary in Nevada, line for Democrats. You're on the air, Mary.
Hi, I'm very concerned about our country. We've lost our values, our norms, our morals. It's wrong. What didn't go through Congress, our Congress has been out on vacation since January. It's just wrong on every level. About drugs, he pardoned the man from Honduras, the dictator who dropped off 400 tons of cocaine in the United States. He aligns himself. He rolls out the red carpet for war criminals, Putin. This is about a change in the global order. And I'd like to know what those two are cooking up behind the lines, because I don't think he's got Ukraine's best interests at heart. This is you do what you do, but you got to do it in the right way. And this is not the right way. We are not going before Congress. And he needs to have checks on him, and he hasn't had checks. Nobody's following the money, the grift in this administration, the billions of dollars. There's a reason he went to the Gulf in his first term and the second term. Those were his first trips, because that's where the money is. And billions are being made to enrich himself and his family in crypto.
All right, Mary, and here's Chuck in California, Republican line. Chuck, your thoughts on the action in Venezuela?
Oh, I think it's the right thing to do. I've never seen a president like this before, where he had the interest of America first. And people talk about wanting to enrich himself, which is ridiculous. He's already one of the richest persons around. And so we all know that Maduro was an illegitimate dictator. I mean, people in Chile right now are cheering that this happened. I just saw it on TV just a little while ago. And I think it's one of the best things that has happened this year. Like I said, he has the best interests of America at heart, and it's amazing that we have not a politician, but someone that's in a place of a position where he can actually help America. And I think that's what he's done all along.
Becky in Camp Verde, Arizona, Independent Line, you're on the air.
I can't believe that he's starting a war without anybody trying to stop him from Congress or the Senate. It's terribly wrong. Terribly wrong. He wants peace, 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 he speaks of, yet he kills, kills, kills. Thank you for letting me speak my mind.
Let's hear from Margaret in Santa Maria, California, Democrat. Go ahead, Margaret.
Hello. Thank you. A NATO country was attacked by another NATO country, and no NATO countries came to their aid. So what good is NATO? You may not agree with many.
Wait. Which NATO country was attacked? Venezuela is not in NATO.
Are you sure? They spoke in a NATO meeting recently.
No, Venezuela would not be a part of NATO, Margaret. I can make sure, but that's the North Atlantic. So, yeah, is that what you thought?
Yes, that is what I thought.
No, Venezuela is not a member of NATO, for sure. Justin in Allentown, Pennsylvania, Independent Line. Good morning.
Good morning. So what I see is just another terrorist attack by global Zionist supremacy. As it continues, we won't know freedom. So really the only way to know freedom, again, is to destroy the global Zionists.
Okay. And this is Willie in Warner Robins, Georgia, Republican. Good morning.
Yes. You got me?
Yes, I do. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I was just wanting to say that today's my son's birthday, and he's 43 years old. If he had lived 23 years ago, but he died from crystal meth, and lost 3 of my classmates that I went to school with, and they also died of cocaine, crystal meth, and other drugs. And I've lost my best friend recently from a cocaine overdose, and he died in Walmart's checkout. So if people hadn't never stared at a casket and seen their son laying there, they need not even talk about this program. Well, I appreciate you taking my call.
All right, Willie. Let's talk to Sherry next. Democrat, Macomb, Michigan. Good morning.
Good morning. I think people are missing the point here. This was actually a war on drugs, and I'm kind of appalled at the people who, all the Americans are thinking this is so wrong just because it's Trump and they have TDS, as opposed to if you look at the Venezuelan people, if you look at off mainstream media and just look at, they're cheering. Right now, all of them in Miami, Florida, cheering.
Okay. Chris, Huntsville, Alabama, Independent Line. You're on the air, Chris.
Good morning, America. This is a multi-level distraction. It's an unbelievable distraction. If you look at Ukraine, Trump is going to need an excuse not to send weapons to Ukraine. This provides him a distraction not to send weapons to Ukraine. He promised the oil guys for however much crypto money he got out of the oil people, he promised them he'd do whatever he'd do if they just contributed to his campaign. Boom, they've got all the oil in Venezuela now. Also, earlier in the day, you had somebody call in about the Vulcan Mineral Company. There's about 17 billion with a B tons of high-grade gold ore in Venezuela. That'll also be come in play along with the oil. And it's just he's a supplicant to Putin, and this is a great excuse not to send Ukraine weapons. Thank you for listening.
Let's talk to Steve next, a Republican in Maitland, Florida. Good morning, Steve.
Hi, good morning. I'm just sitting here listening to people right now. This is amazing, Democrat or Republican or independent. I'm very conservative. This is amazing. I was raised when Betty Ford was sitting there yelling about your brain on drugs. Nancy Reagan was doing commercials about drugs. This is amazing. The fentanyl, the crack cocaine, the cocaine has destroyed people's lives individually. I'm sitting here listening to the Democrats rationalize that he shouldn't be at war. This last guy was yelling about weapons going to Ukraine. This is under the Monroe Doctrine. Okay, people don't remember James Monroe as president. Okay, this is our backyard. We have Hezbollah and Hamas in Cuba. We have Russia, China, Iran, North Korea feeding weapons into this hemisphere. We have drug cartels in Mexico. I don't understand. If someone does something right, regardless if they're Republican or Democrat, I am conservative. I go by the Constitution. This man is in fully the right way to do something. I voted for this man. I'll say it up front. But on the other hand, he's saving people's lives. This is not about oil. We have plenty of oil. We get oil from anywhere. He dropped the price of a barrel of oil to $17 a barrel the last time when he was in office. This is a joke. This ain't about minerals. We can get minerals from Japan. Japan has a little island they discovered this week that's full of minerals. We don't need minerals. We don't need oil. We have it. This is about common sense about saving the American people. Though another woman was talking about Nevada. I can't believe he's doing this. He goes to war. Go to war with what? We sent in 5 helicopters, a couple of Delta Forts, and flew them out and flew out Maduro. We did it under Noriega, if anyone remembers history.
So, Steve, are you expecting this to be the end of any military action on Venezuela, or do you expect it to continue to escalate? What do you think?
No, I believe this is the end because what he's doing behind backdoor channels now, he's talking to the vice president. That is very disgusting, that woman that's under Maduro, and he's telling her to leave. If she doesn't leave, then he'll have to take action again and fly in. This is right here is an example to the Iranian regime. The Iranian people are being killed this week. No one's even mentioning that.
All right. Here's Gary in Pennsylvania, a Democrat. Go ahead, Gary.
So much going on. Happy New Year, everybody. I just got to say that this guy is taking bribes from Syria, Qatar, from everybody around. He takes $1 million bribes to let them out of prison, to get pardons. He's doing it right in front of your cult. Can't they wake up and see all the corruption? He got the $400 million airplane. When he went to Syria to visit with the president, that guy had a $10 million bounty on his head for having organized the barracks bombing that killed 200 Marines. He also organized the killing of that reporter and the 9/11 attacks, but yet now he's best friends with them because he's getting money.
Wait,
He and his family.
Who Gary?
Yes.
Who did all those things and is best friends, you're saying?
Trump. Dopey Trump.
Is best friends with who?
Is friends with the president from Syria and all the Putin.
So the president of Syria didn't do the Marine barracks bombing in 1982.
He was part of the organization of it. He didn't personally participate in the towers being blown up either, but he helped organize it, as well as killing that reporter. He was part of all of that. And if he was so concerned about law and order, he had Putin right here in the U.S. He could have arrested him on the war crimes and taken him under arrest.
All right. And here's Van in Paris, Ohio, Independent Line. Good morning.
Thank you for having me. I just want to say, if he's so against the war on drugs, so against the cartels, Mexico is supplying most of the fentanyl, and we are right next door, neighbors with Mexico, and he pardoned a ruthless drug lord that brought in 400 tons of cocaine. He must have made a lot of money on that 400 tons of cocaine when he was in power in Honduras. And so now he's pardoned him. I wonder if he took any money for that pardon. And I wonder how many other pardons he made that were illegitimate. All those people in the January 6th pardoned them, 1,600 of them. And most of them pleaded guilty. And some of them said the only reason why they were there was because Donald Trump asked them to come.
All right, Van. We will just pause the calls. If you're already on the line, please wait and stay on the line, because we're just going to talk briefly to Christian Daytalk. He is Washington Examiner's White House correspondent. Christian, welcome to the program. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Mimi. Happy to join you guys on such a big news day.
So to what extent has the White House telegraphed what President Trump will be addressing this morning at 11 o'clock?
Well, the White House proper is keeping its trap shut. Now, we did hear from President Trump on Fox News Saturday morning. He called in and did a lengthy half-hour-long interview, but they're really leaving this one up to the president to lay out the details, the operational successes, and the near, tragedies involving a number of U.S. military members. Of course, the president did tell Fox News that multiple service members were hit and injured by gunfire during the raid on Maduro. Thankfully, none of them were fatal, but it is something that President Trump is going to have to sell to his base, because, of course, this is a move that many in the administration have been pressuring for. First and foremost, Secretary of State Marco Rubio. But we have to think about the president's campaign promise not to put any American boots on the ground overseas, and, of course, his pledge to not only end the forever wars which have plagued the United States through the 21st century, but prevent future wars through his P through strength dogma. So I think it might be a little bit of a difficult sell for some, but we're all anxious to hear what President Trump has to say at 11 a.m. this morning.
And any information, Christian, on the lieutenants of Maduro and what their fates could be?
That certainly is up in the air. President Trump addressed this on Fox News as well. And he said, look, if they remain, quote unquote, loyal to the regime, it's going to be very, very bad for them. But he did signal a potential backing of the opposition leader. Now, he didn't come out right and say, we are going to install a new government, but he had suggested that if there is a quote unquote conversion of the government, then things can go along as normal in Venezuela, and hopefully even better than normal for the Venezuelan people, who we do know have suffered greatly at the hands of the Maduro regime.
And President Trump also to Fox had said that Maduro and his wife were on their way to New York to stand trial. Do you have any further information or details about that, where they could be held, timeline for a trial?
I don't have any information on where they will be held, but Attorney General Pam Bondi did confirm an indictment this morning in the Southern District of New York for conspiracy to traffic cocaine and other narcotics related charges. So we'd have to imagine they would be held somewhere in a safe location within New York City itself. That being said, this isn't the first time the Trump administration has sought an indictment for Maduro. They pursued one back in 2020 when the president was still in office during his first term. Obviously, there was a huge 4-year-long break during the Biden administration, but this is something that President Trump has sought for years. I've been told that he wanted to tackle Nicolas Maduro, topple that government all the way back in 2017 of his first term in office. That being said, folks at the time in the cabinet, a la H.R. McMaster's and Jim Mattis, basically walked the president off that position. But in his 4 years down in Florida, again, when President Biden was in office, others in his camp, specifically Marco Rubio, they had really animated the president to reignite this campaign against Maduro, not only to stop the alleged flow of narcotics northward into U.S. streets, but also a potential boon for American energy companies with the takeover of the oil industry down there. Now, President Trump did say American energy companies will be very heavily involved in managing those resources moving forward. We'll have to see exactly what that looks like, but this is something he's been thinking about and moving towards for a number of years now.
And finally, Christian, any reaction from America's adversaries, namely China and Russia?
Nothing from Russia yet so far, Mimi, but China has put out a statement condemning the raid. Now, we do know that a number of Chinese diplomats were actually in Caracas when the raid took place. This is certainly another fault line that the president needs to monitor closely because, again, there are many, not only within his own caucus of support, but in the greater American electorate who do not want to see not only a hot war with China, but really a prolonged engagement with any country across the global community. This is a major success right now for President Trump. The fact that this raid was carried off without any fatalities at all. That being said, we do know this is not a done deal yet, no matter what the White House is saying. And I would point you to none other than U.S. engagements in Latin America, like the invasion of Panama in 1989, the U.S. intervention in the Dominican Civil War back in the 1960s, and of course, those forever wars that the U.S. was entrenched in throughout the entirety of the 21st century following the September 11th terror attack. So a lot to keep our eyes on here, but luckily President Trump is going to be speaking to us from Florida in just a few more minutes.
All right, and that is coming up at scheduled for 11 a.m. today. C-SPAN will have live coverage of that. Stay with us for that. And Christian Daytalk, White House correspondent for the Washington Examiner, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Mimi.
Get back to your calls up until that news conference gets underway. We will stay with you and get your reaction and opinions and thoughts about the strike against Venezuela and the capturing of Venezuela's leader, Maduro, and his wife. Donald is on the line for Democrats in Grand Blanc, Michigan. Good morning.
Good morning, Mimi, and good morning to America. I'm listening to these brainwashed Republicans call in and praise President Trump, who's clearly a con man and a grifter, who has taken bribes from Saudi Arabia, taken bribes from drug dealers, taken bribes from all kind of people. And he was, in his first campaign, sued by a young lady, a 13-year-old young lady, and settled out of court.
So Donald, getting us back to Venezuela, your reaction?
He acted without Congress. We have a Republican Congress, House members that don't show up to work, take vacations, while this idiot Trump destroys this country and this Constitution. These Republicans need to get their heads out their ass. Idiot.
All right. Let's talk to Raul in Raleigh, North Carolina, Independent Line.
I'd like to make a statement briefly and with smiles. So thank you for what you do as a medical provider. Chat with lots of patients and hear a lot of things that aren't really positive. So your job's tough, and I appreciate what you're doing. And this does relate to the Venezuela conflict regarding freedom of speech and just peace around the earth. So thank you for what you do. And my question would be, do you feel like you're inundated with calls from AI bots that present the same message over and over, and that's it? And thank you, and I hope just to say smiles and keep doing what you're doing.
Jake in Franklin Square, New York, Republican, you're on the air.
Hi there. I really can't believe how democracy is dying. What's going to happen, just like that correspondent said, the oil companies are going to exploit Venezuela. They're not going to pay them right. They're not going to invest in them. They're just going to exploit them. If there are rare earths, they're going to exploit the rare earths. First, the Trump administration, they tried to get mercenaries to kill Maduro. They didn't catch him. Trump said funnily on a video, said, hey, I don't know anything about that. No, they knew something about that. It's always going to be about the oil, about getting rid of China and Russia's influence there. Democracy's dead. There will never be a true democracy in Venezuela if they oppose Trump, if they oppose those oil companies coming in and exploiting them. The democracy, nobody likes democracy. And whoever's going to be in charge of Venezuela is going to be a sycophant, someone who fawns over or subservient to the United States. And people, I can't believe that people do not fight for democracy. Yeah, Maduro was bad and he was horrible. He had to go. But what's going to happen is it's going to be replaced by these oligarchs, these fascists, that they're going to exploit that oil. They're going to exploit rare earths if there are any. And again, it's going to be whoever is subservient to Trump in the United States, whoever fawns over the United States, whoever names their children these white names, Walter, or whatever they name. It's this imperialism of culture, imperialism of resources, instead of saying, hey, it's your country, you decide. No, America's going to come in there and tell them what to do. And the fact that people aren't disgusted by that is amazing, but that is a colonial culture. That's what this country is, a colonial culture.
All right. Sandy, Democrat in Jackson, New Jersey. You're on the air, Sandy.
Hi. I'm just curious, doesn't anybody kind of see this as being a little bit hypocritical? I mean, Jack Smith's report just came out on New Year's Eve, and I did listen to it excitedly, only because, and he said that he feels Trump was 100% responsible for trying to overthrow the election. Isn't it kind of hypocritical that he thinks he needs to get rid of someone else in another country for doing the same thing that he tried to do? Maybe he's upset he couldn't get away with it. I don't understand that. And then he says he's worried about drugs. If he's worried about drugs, do something about the demand. What about the people in this country that are selling them? What about the organized crime in this country? What is he doing for that? He sends in the National Guard. He takes everybody off the street. I wonder where the homeless people were taken to. Where did they go? What did he do to help them? He does the easy way out. He doesn't care about anybody but himself. And let's face it, Venezuela was about the oil. It was not about the government. He doesn't care because he cares about himself. What did he do for Ukraine? Nothing.
All right, Sandy, let's talk to Layla in Independent in Johnson City, Tennessee. You're on the air, Layla.
Okay. My issue is, when you take out the president, what vacuum have you created? And who are the people who are going to take over? The gangs or somebody else? And what is it our duty to really, go around and police the world? Now he wants to go to Iran. This is really as stupid as we could be. It is the oil, nothing else. We're not interested in change of regime unless if the regime is by us put in place. It is sad, though, that we are in this position. We are looking for an angry place to really go and fester our problems.
All right, Layla, this is the Associated Press. DOJ releases new indictment of Maduro and wife on charges of narco-terrorism conspiracy. It says that the U.S. is now deciding next steps for Venezuela. President Donald Trump said Saturday on Fox News, adding, quote, will be involved in it very much. That's at the Associated Press. And we'll talk to David in Tyler, Texas, Republican. Good morning, David.
Yes, thanks for your call. This is a great day for the United States. We have to thank the good Lord that we have President Trump who's willing to come in here and deal with these drug cartels. We have to get control of the Western Hemisphere, or if we don't, the drugs are going to kill the young Americans off. We have to get control of it. President Trump knows that. His administration realizes that. He is doing a great job. And look out, Mexico and Colombia. Thank you.
Rob in Richmond, Virginia, Democrat. You're on the air, Rob.
I just want to say you look like a beautiful femme fatale this morning. You're dressed appropriately for this day. Let me get a few points, if you don't mind. My first point is that if you can, well, so a lot of these Republican, not independents, callers, I'd like you to kind of question them when they say that, that people died from drugs and this and that, and it's a great day. But ask them, what do they think about Trump pardoning a guy that brought 400 tons? How many people died from that? And he wasn't treated unfairly. He was prosecuted by a U.S. court. It wasn't like a out-of-country court or something like that. And secondly, if Trump cared about more people die from alcoholism, more people die from prescription drug overdoses than they do from illegal overdoses. So why aren't they raiding the executives' homes, the Sacklers, alcohol executives, other people? Why aren't they shutting all that stuff down? People die every day. Families are ruined more by alcohol, probably more than any other drug in the world. And lastly, I just want to say that this is great distraction. These people, I'm telling you, this Trump organization has done a great distraction because everything, the Epstein's now gone, the Jack Smith thing that just came out, that's buried under the thing. And he promised, how's this putting America first? Everything's supposed to be going great. Everything's not going great. The economy is in turmoil here. So you have to create a distraction to get people off what's the promises that were broke, America First promises. He promised to the billionaires that if you cut their taxes, that they're going to take care of everybody. They're going to create jobs. People are getting laid off in masses. They're speeding up AI to kill people, jobs off permanently. So all these things, it's just a distraction, and I hope everybody realizes it, which side you're on. It's hurting everybody here, and this isn't America First. Thank you.
Carrie in Illinois, Independent Line. Go ahead, Carrie.
Thank you, Mimi. The last guy that just called, he's correct. This is nothing but a distraction. If America believed that this was a war on drugs, how you let a guy that have 400 tons of cocaine, you let him off? Come on, give me a break. Come on, please. And also, we won't have any health care. We won't have no health care, but we can fight wars, and we can go across the world and support dictators who are on our side. You're talking about a man who supports dictators, Putin. He want us to be like Hungary. Listen to what I'm saying. He wants us to be like Hungary. America is going to change into Hungary? Oh no, it shouldn't be. And then the people in Venezuela, I feel bad for those people because you're bombing innocent people who don't have anything to do. 8 million people on the run. This president is sad. It's a joke.
All right, Carrie, and we've got a posting on X by Speaker Mike Johnson, so I'll read that to you. I have spoken in the last several hours with Secretary Rubio and Secretary Hegseth, and the nation will hear from POTUS and his address at 11 a.m. Today's military action in Venezuela was a decisive and justified operation that will protect American lives. Nicolas Maduro is responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Americans after years of trafficking illegal drugs and violent cartel members into our country, crimes for which he's been properly indicted in U.S. courts and an arrest warrant duly issued. And today, he learned what accountability looks like. President Trump is putting American lives first, succeeding where others have failed, and under his leadership, the United States will no longer allow criminal regimes to profit from wreaking havoc and destruction on our country. The Trump administration is working to schedule briefings for members of Congress, as Congress returns to Washington next week. Our brave military personnel who executed a precise successful operation deserve our gratitude and congratulations. That's Speaker Mike Johnson. Of course, any of those briefings from members of Congress this week, if they are open and public, we will show that to you here on C-SPAN. And the news conference set to start at 11 a.m. Eastern will also be live here on C-SPAN. Until then, we'll hear from Ricardo, Port St. Lucie, Florida, Republican. You're on the air.
Hi, good morning. What a beautiful day here in Florida. Look, I was born in Colombia, and I really understand the context about what is happening. Unlike millions of Latin Americans, I carry a region with pain and hope in my heart. What happened today go just beyond politics. It represents the end of a chapter writing with fear, with silence, with suffering, because this is a dictatorship that forced millions of families to leave their homes, broke apart communities, and violated the most basic human rights. You know, you can even understand how is Miami right now, how is Madrid, how is Chile, how is Argentina, and is Latin America celebrating freedom. And this is not just for the people of Venezuela. It's a hope for a future where no nation in Latin America has to live under oppression again. Thank you so much.
And Ricardo, before you go, what do you think? Do you think that this is the end of dictatorship in Venezuela? That it will be a democracy?
That's the big question, you know, because they have control of the army. So this is the biggest problem. They control the army. These people that is running the army, they give millions of dollars for the Cartel de los Soles. This is a big organization that is trafficking drugs on a level that the people here in America don't understand, you know. And I had family in Venezuela, people with great business that they run the country because these Maduro and Chavez, these start in 1999. And this is the second biggest exodus in the history. It's crazy how many people just left the country because they don't have the conditions. Trust me, a lot of people from Venezuela, they don't want to go to Spain. They don't want to go to Argentina, Chile, Colombia, United States. They was forced to do that because they control everything. They put in jail so many people. It's so sad. It's so sad because they destroyed one of the biggest nations in the world. They destroyed it in just 20 years. It's crazy how they can do that, you know? It's so sad. It's like right now, this is the big questions, and I really want to know what is going to happen because this is going to be a transition. This transition is not going to be easy, you know? But this is a great day in Latin America. You can even imagine.
Okay, Ricardo, here's Monty, a Democrat in Providence, Kentucky. You're on the air.
Yes, thank you for taking my call. I think this is terrible that our military is being used to go in and push somebody out. These people that's calling in is very, very intelligent. Some of them is very, very dumb. But we got some people that's very, very intelligent that's calling in and putting it just the way it is. Now, Putin and Kim Jong-un and Kim, whatever it is in Korea, hey, they sitting back watching us, and they're sitting here watching how dumb we are by doing this kind of thing. And so, okay, when we all come over here and drop bombs on the United States, we all going to be looking stupid, all of us, because we all going to be dead. So y'all just keep on thinking that what we're doing is all right to go in these other countries and do something to smaller countries. But no, because we go in there and do something to China. No, China sit back and waiting. North Korea and Putin sitting by and waiting for all this to fall down.
All right, Monty, and we have a posting on X from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, representative of New York, Democrat, who says it's not about drugs. If it was, Trump wouldn't have pardoned one of the largest narco traffickers in the world last month. It's about oil and regime change, and they need a trial now to pretend that it isn't, especially to distract from Epstein and skyrocketing healthcare costs. Let's talk to Roberto, independent in Palm Beach Gardens, Florida. Good morning, Roberto.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. And I'll just follow up on a little bit of what this guy from Venezuela said, and that is that, yes, nice, to have a new change in the government. Yes, but I was also born in Peru, and I came out here when I was a kid. So going back and forth in Peru, it's been nothing but not fun because a lot of Venezuelans have migrated there for the last 7 years. And I've seen it working there. I've seen some crime. I even tried to catch this guy in a motorcycle, stealing from a government official, and that's not fun, to see them newspapers and just rubbish the country. People kill left and right. They lose their cellular. They intimidate. They call them sicarios, people that, they, like the mafia. They got a lot of mafias in there. They turns out always there still. And now after what happened today or yesterday, there's going to be more aftermath. Where do they go? A lot of people still don't know, and I feel that they're going right back to Colombia and into filtering to Peru. And the people in Peru, and they're really tightened up.
All right, Roberto. On the Republican line, Mary is in Ola, Louisiana. Good morning, Mary.
Hello, how are you?
Good.
Yes, I just want to say that, I'm pulling over here. So I want to say that our President Trump ends wars. He absolutely ends wars. He is ending a civil war in which the power of a duly elected president has been usurped by a rogue person, and also the war on America. Every boat that is blown up, or whether it succeeds in getting to the United States, is like a battle. And Trump has been battling. And Trump's ready to end a war. Okay, he does not start wars, he ends wars. The act of wars were drugs perpetuated on American citizens. And another act of war was within his country, his own country, against its citizens. And that's what I'd like to say.
Here's Tim in Bolaji, Alabama, Democrat. Hi, Tim.
Good morning. I just find it surprising that people are just so blind by the things and lies that Donald Trump says. He says that Medicare fraud. He says IRS fraud. He said federal workers are committing fraud. But yet and still, not one person or company was arrested or charged with fraud. He says ACA is fraud.
Get us to Venezuela, Tim.
Are going up. Venezuela. He is overthrowing and abducted the president of Venezuela because of democracy, when he engaged in insurrection in this country. He's abducting American citizens in broad daylight off the streets. So, what kind of leader do the world look at this man and see? He is a financial failure. Six times he filed for bankruptcy, and not only that, how many times have he avoided going in the service to serve his country? But yet and still, he can go out and use the military. Well, he's the leader of this country, so I guess he can do anything he wants to, thanks to the Supreme Court.
All right, here's Laura in Sebring, Florida, independent line. Go ahead, Laura.
Hello. I just wanted to make a statement. There's no way that those boats, as small as they were, would have ever been able to make it to the United States of America. They're too small. There's no way they would have even had the gas to get there.
So, Laura, many of them would stop at another Caribbean country along the way.
Oh, and gas stop? Oh, okay. But the oil is the main reason that I believe that we're going after that country. Because I pray for this country every day, because it's getting to be all about money, all about greed, and how much power you can have. Like our White House is torn to shreds for a golden ballroom. Come on, we don't need this. We don't. Come on, people. We need to get together and just love our country. And Venezuela, what if they want to come here, right? What if they want to come here? They're not going to be allowed to, right?
All right. And in Pennsylvania, on the line for Republicans, Evelyn, you're on the air.
Yes, I want to say President Trump is our best president ever. And those boats that got blown up, were they fishing? I didn't see any fishing rods. So we got to keep drugs out of this country. Thank you.
Lisa, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Democrat. You're on the air, Lisa.
Hey, good morning. I am appalled at the events of yesterday, invading a country, kidnapping their leaders. None of us appreciate drugs in our country. But Donald Trump's agenda is always personal. He does nothing but supports his billionaire friends. Every motive he has is to make Trump great again. It has nothing to do with the country or the people of this country. It's shameful that he's a bully that uses the strongest military in the world to satisfy his power grabs and his greedy billionaire power grabs. It's a shame. I pray for this country every day that we unite. We see the truth about this fascist government, and I pray for the people of Venezuela. Thank you.
Let's talk to Beth next in Wisconsin, line for independence. Go ahead, Beth.
Good morning. I believe this whole Venezuela raid is a charade, that Trump is showing Putin, who has him in his pocket for whatever reason, blackmail or money, that he's not going to do anything to help the Ukraine. And I think it's his way of telling the Ukraine, you might as well just give up because the U.S. is under my thumb and I'm not going to let it help you. In the weeks ahead, when bombs start falling in the United States, who is going to be our ally? Trump has betrayed every one of them.
And this is David in Fort Lee, New Jersey, Republican line. Good morning, David.
Good morning. Thanks for taking my call and Happy New Year. I wanted to thank you for several of your commentators who helped elucidate what is actually going on in Venezuela. My comment is more about the appearance of impropriety and the unfortunate inability of either Republicans or Democrats to get past the constant barrage of negativity brought upon itself by the Trump administration, be it the Epstein files or the pardoning of Hernandez in Honduras or any number of other events that don't allow us to come together and discuss whether or not there ought to have been a removal of Maduro. And it's hard to talk about Maduro as a drug kingpin when you're pardoning the drug kingpin next door. So again, it's whether or not good or bad is coming out of the actions taken by this administration, it's hard to get past the appearance of impropriety. And it appears to me that they don't care, that no actions or nothing's been done. They just do what they want. And that's a problem. Thank you.
On the line for Democrats in Toledo, Ohio, Helen? Nope, wrong one, sorry. Helen in Toledo, Ohio, Democrat. Are you on the air? You're on the air.
Yes.
You're there. Okay, good. Go ahead.
All right. I just want to thank a lot of the callers that are not in comatose, who see everything that's happening in Venezuela for what it's worth. It's strictly for the resources, because China and Russia also has a bid into the oil and resources in in Venezuela. And also, when the caller said this is a great day in America, it is just totally the opposite, because over 20 million some people have lost health care, premiums, and child care, daycare, and other accommodations for the welfare of the working people. This is ridiculous, and we do need a different administration. The spineless and stepwise administration we have is just unbelievable. We need to have a term limit also, especially when you get over a certain age. It should be a term limit for the Supreme Court and Congress and all of the other so-called administrations that are not for the American people. Thank you.
Dwayne in Ohio, independent line. Go ahead, Dwayne.
Yes, thank you. I'm confused because if ICE is going after so many Latin Americans and sending them back to their country, and a lot of Venezuelans came here, and now he's bombing that country, where are those people to go? Where are those people to go? Some have eluded that country to come to America. And when they come here, what does he do? He apprehends them. So if that isn't a conflict of interest, I don't know what is. You've got Latin Americans right now celebrating in South Florida. And how many of those are illegal? Where's ICE at now? So this man is just, he's like a dog chasing his tail. He does one thing and then he conflicts it with another. And, where's the end of this? So to me, it's all about trying to mask the true issues, which are the Epstein files.
All right, let's talk to Ray on the Republican line in Washington State. Go ahead, Ray.
Yes, I'd like to make a comment. Donald Trump is trying to get this world back into order and do the best he can and with this administration. And I think he's doing a really good job or an excellent job in what he's doing to help the American people and everybody else in the world. He's trying to solve many problems, which is a very difficult thing to do. And I think he's doing an excellent job. Thank you very much. Bye.
Lori, Democrat, Louisville, Kentucky. Go ahead, Lori.
Hi, and Mary. Happy New Year to everybody.
Happy New Year, Lori.
I was aghast when I heard the news this morning of the attack in Venezuela. There's been so many missteps by this administration, run by a convicted criminal, 34 counts. I don't know what we can expect would happen with having him as our president. But everything is not what it seems. We didn't strike in Venezuela and remove their leader for drugs. It's pretty obvious if drugs was the reason, he would not have pardoned a convicted criminal who brought in 400 tons of cocaine into this country directly. There's so many conflicts of interest that you can't even count them. It's a grift. People don't want to see that, but the facts prove it.
All right, and we are standing by for President Trump's news conference that was scheduled to start right now. So we are going to just continue to take your calls until the president approaches the podium and starts speaking. So we'll talk now to Effie, independent in Newport Richey, Florida.
Hi, yes, thank you for taking my call. For me, this is yet another terrible day for the United States. Some of the callers seem to think that invading another country is okay because they've embraced the propaganda that's being provided to them by a very corrupt administration. And depending on what news station they're watching, they have agendas. And so they are basically embracing these agendas. I want to ask, did they learn anything from Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, Vietnam, et cetera, et cetera? You know, we're not the good guys. We're going into a sovereign country, And we're not going after the drugs. We're going after the oil. And do we honestly think that the Venezuelan people are going to go along with this? And if the past serves as a blueprint, we usually stick crony dictators in, and we do it to get control, and we all know how that turns out. I'd like to know where our checks and balances have gone in this country, and I'm really embarrassed by the callers who think this is a good idea. I feel that they did not pay attention in history class. In Gaza, he's basically turned a humanitarian crisis into something that seems to be okay as long as we can, fund it with our tax dollars and create a Riviera. Yet Venezuela is something important.
All right, Effie. Let's talk to Martha in Missouri, Republican line. Go ahead, Martha.
I cannot believe that anybody could say that what he's doing is right. He's knocked down our White House. Everything he does, he doesn't get any permission from the Congress. His remarks were, "I'm the president. I can do anything I want." That sounds like a damn dictator to me.
And Martha, you're a Republican. Did you vote for President Trump?
I voted for him the first 2 times. I did not vote for him the last time because I could see the handwriting on the wall. He's an egotist. He's a pedophile. He's a convicted criminal. And somebody in Washington needs to stand up to this man. I cannot believe he has these people believing he's doing the right thing. He is not doing the right thing. He's going to get us in a war. And this time it may be fought on our soil. And I don't agree with anything he does because he does it behind the back of everybody, and he's got these Republicans so scared that they're afraid to stand up to him. And when he bulldozed down part of the White House, that was and pardoned all those people that came in and tore up my White.
Martha, look, we're standing by to take you to Mar-a-Lago for President Trump's news conference. In the meantime, Kevin is in Shrewsbury, Massachusetts, Democrat. Go ahead, Kevin.
Yes, we ask ourselves what's driving this con man's presidency. Why does this grifter continue to draw so much attention every day on our major networks and on the front pages of our nation's newspapers? Many of us have concluded that he is the commodity, the product that helps them all attract readers and, more importantly, sell advertising. They all make money off the Orange Man, and they love it. Many Americans, however, do remember the chaos in the White House during his first term, the Secretary of State calling him a moron and then leaving his cabinet, the number of temporary appointments in his administration because he would not keep anyone that did not walk lockstep with him like the Nazi troops did for Hitler. We remember the fallout with our European allies, his love for Putin.
So Kevin, bring us to Venezuela.
He got from his meetings with Putin and his disinterest in paying any attention to our own NSA, CIA, and military intelligence briefings.
But regarding Venezuela?
19. I think the number was an additional 500,000 Americans before he took the pandemic seriously and did.
All right. We'll talk to Ed now in Indiana. Independent line. Go ahead, Ed.
Yeah, I'm really disturbed because a lot of people do not actually understand it's not also just about the drugs. Everybody's hit on it, and I do support this action. We cannot have Iraq, North Korea, China, Russia on our doorstep down here on the south end of the Gulf, because it would be a very, very dangerous thing to have them there, because it is a backdoor into Mexico, and then they can flood their people in. The other side of this is he is not the first president to drop bombs on a country. Obama dropped something like 28,000 bombs without permission from Congress. He's done the same thing. This is an ongoing thing, and it's a Monroe Doctrine thing. We're trying to keep our side of the globe clean of, I guess, incursions. My son served in the military for 10 years over in the Middle East, and it was no different there than it is here.
I don't want to see a long war, but if you have to get rid of someone who's paid by narco traffickers, who's paid by Iraq, who's paid by China to turn his face and do whatever, then so be it. It's
right.
no different than anywhere else in the world.
Let's talk to Tim, Republican, Graham, North Carolina. Go ahead, Tim.
Yes, I don't know why they would say it was the wrong idea. He's trying to protect the American people. People die of fentanyl overdoses every day, and I think he's doing a great job. You know, you want to talk about scammers. I mean, they left all them people in Gaza over there, all the ISIS people, all kinds of equipment when they done a pullout. I mean, Biden did. He was an idiot.
That's
And
Afghanistan, Tim. Yep.
Yes, ma'am. Well, Afghanistan, I'm sorry. And the ACA ain't nothing but a ripoff. The Affordable Care Act, you know, they don't have any.
I'm not talking about that right now, but here's Danya in Homestead, Florida, Democrat. Go ahead, Danya.
Yes, hi, good morning. You know, I don't know why, and I think people need to wake up a little bit to see really what's going on in this country. The president had a meeting with Putin not too long ago before all this has happened. And he even spoke about it himself, how he would have done it earlier in his first term. But of course, the type of influence that he has gained now in this administration, in this year, and throughout the years, even during Biden, to gain this uproar of this cult of what MAGA is, has allowed him to do whatever he wants. Now, the only good thing that the president did was really help out the Venezuelan people. And now we really have to ask ourselves, what is exactly that happened in that meeting with President Trump and Putin? And if you
think it had something to do with Venezuela?
I think that this meeting was the meeting that he had with Putin, and what is going on now was a negotiation that he had with President Putin. Why is it that he's not taking any action or anything with Ukraine? This was a trade-off. The trade-off was this. He said to Putin.
But I'm sure Putin would be.
Venezuela.
Yeah, but I'm sure. Okay, no, go ahead. What do you think he said to Putin?
What I think he said to Putin was, I'll take Venezuela and I'll let you have Ukraine. This is exactly what it was planned and agreed on. Now, what's going to happen after this, I don't know. But, I mean, it's really no one knows. This is something, you know, that this administration has created chaos, but there's nothing coming out of this that's good. President Trump sold our country to foreigners. He is selling out our country little by little. And everyone needs to wake up. It's not about Democrats. It's not about Republicans. We need to stand together and come in unison and in agreement that what this country is what's going to happen to this country in the foreseeable years is not going to be something good. We already have.
We got that point. This is Joshua, a Republican in Cleveland, Ohio. Go ahead, Joshua.
Oh, I just want. I'm listening to all these folks, and I'm like, where do they get all these information from? All I got to say is, this guy was a narco terrorist. Guy was killing American people, and they are complaining about this was a police action. We're not. This was a police action. I can see why Democrats don't really don't like him, because I guess they agree with the president of Venezuela, because he's a Democrat, he's a socialist, and I guess they like those kind of guys. So all I gotta say is he did a good job. All these people who are making all these conspiracies need to cut it out.
All right, Joshua, and on your screen you see the reporters are there gathered in anticipation, as we are, of President Trump speaking about the actions taken overnight in Venezuela and the capturing of Maduro and his wife, and we will bring that to you just as soon as he approaches the podium. Here is John, Pompano Beach, Florida, Independent Line. Go ahead, John.
Yes. Happy New Year. Not a great way to start the new year, but where are we going from here? Nobody hasn't answered that question. Where are we going from here? Because the thing is, now, what if China takes over Taiwan? Or what if, like the young lady was talking about, what about if it was a negotiation with Putin? Okay, you could take Venezuela and I'll just keep on going with Ukraine. And I think that's where we're headed, but nobody understands what mess this president, if you want to call him president, what he's getting the United States into. Poor are service people that have to go and clean up after his mess. Thank you very much.
On the line for Democrats in Andalusia, Illinois, Bill, you're on the air.
Yeah, it's pretty disheartening that we have a president that feels he can go into any country and do as he wills. And you have Republicans that stand up and root how great this is. They hang on to a church and a cross around their neck. And last I heard is that do unto others as you have done to you. What if somebody came and stole Donald Trump? I think there'd be a lot of happy people. Have a good day.
Clay in Hernando, Mississippi, Republican. You're on the air, Clay.
Hello, thank you. I just wanted to point out the similarity about Ukraine. That country was actually trying to be taken over by Russia. And what you look and see is that Venezuela is very similar because Venezuela was taken over by corrupt elections, even with the previous elections of Hugo Chavez. The people that were from Venezuela were discussing the fact that those elections weren't fair and upright. I had a coworker that I worked with that I met that was from Venezuela, and he was an engineer and was a very educated, upstanding person, and I've respected him. And I asked him about why he was had left his country and come to our country. We had been employed at our company for about a year. He told me that Venezuela had been corrupted in so many ways that there were millions of people who left their country because of the socialism policies that had taken over. And basically the government of Maduro was basically just a cartel that was run by just armed guerrillas. They took away all the weapons in the country so that the people couldn't defend themselves. Anybody that protested, they murdered them. And a lot of people left the country and went everywhere. So our country has probably acted in the interest of the condition of our hemisphere, and the fact that the destabilization of Brazil is starting to occur, and all the drugs and stuff that were probably coming, fentanyl was probably coming on those oil tankers. I mean, I can't say that for sure. Who knows? But the nations that have their gross national product basically as drugs and everything is probably coming to an end. All the drug dealers are probably getting notice that, you're out of work this morning, you need to find something else to do. But thank you for letting me.
All right, Clay. Here's Chuck in Gadsden, Alabama, Independent Line. Go ahead, Chuck.
Yeah, I've been hearing a lot of people talking about the only reason he's in there is the oil. Is that correct?
That's what some people are saying.
Well, here's what I want to ask. Are they in favor of sending the oil to China? Are they in favor of sending the oil to Iraq? Are they in favor of sending the oil to Cuba? Because that's where it's all going. It seems to me that this is a great move to get back at all those people.
All right.
Or all those countries.
Here's Barbara, Democrat, Blue River, Kentucky. Go ahead, Barbara.
Yes, I am appalled. I feel like the same way I felt on January the 6th when I woke up and the current resident in the White House was sending his minions to overthrow our country. Christian nationalism is a perversion of Christianity, and they're using Christian nationalism to overthrow our government. And I'm just totally appalled. And I am encouraged by the number of Republicans that are calling in that are against the overthrow of our country and the total chaos, which I believe is what our current resident in the White House had planned. From the
But Barbara,
start.
how do you see Christian nationalism playing into what happened in Venezuela overnight?
I'm seeing that these preachers are going in their churches and telling the people who occupy those buildings, which, Christ is the church, they're occupying those buildings, are saying that whatever Trump does is okay because he's working for God. And just when I see that Trump signs Bibles and auctions off a picture of a white, blue-eyed Jesus, you can see this propaganda being gobbled up by these people that are in these buildings with heads of those buildings telling them that that's Christianity. And we are not a country based on Christianity. We are a country based on religious freedom. And our country's being destroyed right now. And
all right,
I'm from East.
Barbara, I just got to move on. We got this from J.D. Vance, the vice president, earlier this morning on X. The president offered multiple off-ramps, but was very clear throughout this process. The drug trafficking must stop and the stolen oil must be returned to the United States. Maduro is the newest person to find out that President Trump means what he says. Scott in Minnesota, Republican, you're next.
Hi.
Hi.
This is Scott. Yes, I was very much in favor of the president going to Venezuela. How many times do you have to warn this individual on what was coming into this country as far as fentanyl and what it was doing to the American people? How many people were dying from it? This strike, the guy had been warned for over a month and a half or better and what was going on, and didn't want to cooperate, didn't want to stop the flow of drugs. So I think what President Trump did, I'll stand behind him 110%, and those that don't stand behind him on this because of the fentanyl, I think are
you mean the
cocaine?
cocaine?
Americans,
because it's mostly
cocaine.
It's mostly cocaine. Yeah,
cocaine is mostly cocaine and fentanyl. And that's what's both of them kill many, many, many people. And I just feel what he did was true. And like I say, he's been warned many, many times. So
we've got that 100% point. Here's Robert, Westbrook, Maine, Independent Line. Go ahead.
Everybody out there, okay? Trump invaded and striking Venezuela and capturing the president and his wife because of breaking the law and doing things that are very bad. But yet, Trump is a convicted felon, and he's running the country. What? How is that possible? A convicted felon goes to another country to stop crime when he did so much crime and was convicted of it by his peers, and every single day he's doing crazy shit. He's a live wire. He should never have been in the first place. He wouldn't even be able to get a job, taking out the trash. I'm sorry, but this guy is evil, and there's no better word for it. I have no.
All right,
sympathy.
and let's talk to Devin in Vienna, West Virginia, Democrat. Go ahead, Devin.
Hi. I really think that we kidnap the next president of the United States, really dictator of the United States. I think really we should bring in Xi from China. That's what the Democrat policy is now, so I think we ought to go with that. That's all I got to say. Bye.
Daniel, Staten Island, New York, Republican. Go ahead, Daniel.
Yes, hi. I just want to say President Trump is doing a great job. All these drugs coming into our country, fentanyl killing hundreds of thousands of people each and every year. It's about time that a United States president stands up to these drug cartels and says enough is enough. It's about time that we have a president like Trump that says something and he's going to do it. And I'm so proud of calling him Mr. President Donald Trump because he's doing a hell of a job. Thank you so much.
Jason, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, Independent Line. You're on the air.
Hi. Yeah, I don't think this is about drugs with Venezuela. This is about oil. If it was about fentanyl, he would be standing up to China because we all know that China is the biggest importer of fentanyl. And fentanyl comes through the ports, okay? So this is a dog and pony show. I mean, Maduro was a dictator, and, it's good that he's gone, but the Venezuelan people should have freed themselves. I don't think regime change is good for our image. And as far as Trump, I mean, I voted for him twice, but I'm very disappointed with him the second time. Stephen Miller, his attack on the Venezuelan community, calling them they haven't done nothing, they're criminals. And I mean, you hear these people are so easily duped. They're very easily duped. They're like, yeah, this is about drugs. Well, a monkey knows what tree to climb. If Trump really wanted to go after the fentanyl crisis, he would go after China and say, hey, enough is enough. You guys keep doing this, and we're just going to put on more sanctions or something. But I understand China's another superpower, and it's not that easy. But Venezuela, Maduro's just a puppet. Is it good for Venezuela? We'll yet to see. We'll see,
All right,
but
Jason. And here's the Associated Press. It says Trump told Fox News he spoke to Maduro several times, including most recently a week ago. It says Maduro denied that in an interview on New Year's Eve, saying he had only spoken to Trump in November. And we are standing by to hear from President Trump in Mar-a-Lago. That's the podium there with reporters assembled. And we will take your calls until he gets to the podium. Chris, Antioch, Tennessee, Democrat. Go ahead.
Yes, hi. I'm a Democrat. I'm married to a Venezuelan, and I have a number of Venezuelans and Colombians as in-laws. And I think this could be a good thing for Venezuela, although I disagree with a lot of the stuff that Donald Trump has done. If you look at what Venezuela has been through for the last 26 years with Chavez and Maduro, it's been horrible for Venezuela. And this could be a very good thing for Venezuelans and for the United States. And I'm just kind of surprised also by the misinformation on both sides of the aisle, calls coming in and people comparing this to Gaza or Afghanistan. And this looks to me like it's a police action. And if there's a peaceful transition to democracy, I think this will be a very good thing.
All right, Chris. Doug is next in Falls Church, Virginia, Republican. Go ahead.
Hey, good morning. Thank you all so much for taking my call. I've been listening to you all for most of the morning, and I feel like so many callers are getting this wrong on many levels, right? Venezuela has, I believe, the largest oil reserve in the world. Everyone's talking about that this is mainly about oil. Yes and no. I think the implication that people are saying is that we're going to go down there and take this oil. That's not what's happening, right? The intent of this is to really about regime change. I think it has nothing to do with really drugs. I think that's like maybe tertiary, the fourth reason to do this. It's mainly because we've sanctioned them so much that now they're selling oil at a severe discount to China and giving it or selling to the Cubans at a very, very reduced rate, which is very much propping up both those countries and regimes, which is obviously not in our interest. At the same time, because of how Maduro is treating his people, right, that so many of them are leaving their country and going everywhere. If you look at the Biden administration, millions of Venezuelans have come into our country because they've been trying to escape their own, as well as gone all throughout that region and potentially are destabilizing all those countries around it, whether it's, Chile or Colombia or Venezuela. So many of those different countries, even Argentina, they've had such a massive shift to the right as a direct response to all the immigration and migration that is exiting Maduro's Venezuela. At the same time, there's all this gang activity from Tren de Agua that is now going to all this other region. If people were to look at the regional response to this activity, you have people cheering in the streets, like the capital of Chile, applauding this action because Maduro is so severely disliked. And if you look back at the Biden administration, part of what they were trying to do was, hey, push Maduro to have these free and fair elections and trying to have sanction relief being like a trade-off. And they conducted those elections, and Maduro lost resoundingly. I think he got a third of the vote, and the opponent, I think, was that Lopez, got 2/3 of the vote. So people are calling this regime change. It's not. Maduro lost an election, refused to leave, and now this is undoing the coup, basically, that Maduro did by staying in office.
All right.
This is validating those elections.
Here's Mark, West Point, Kentucky, independent line. Go ahead, Mark.
Yes, I'm a 68-year-old American. I have been voting since 1976. Since January 6th attack on our capital, I have never in my life seen what I have seen Americans starting to go through. This person in charge, I do believe he is the Antichrist, and when he starts doing nuclear, I pray to God for our world.
Josh in Georgia, Democrat. Go ahead, Josh.
Hey, how are y'all doing? I guess it put me on the Democrat line. I'm Republican, yet independent. I love everything that Trump's doing. My father has actually worked security for him, multiple details in Macon, Georgia. My grandmother prays for him every morning. I mean, what he's doing right now is needed because America does not need to look weak. Granted, multiple presidents have made us look weak over the past term or years over the past terms, but when I tell you, I appreciate everything Trump's doing. You got to put your boot down sometimes. That's what we got to do. I'm sick of everybody talking bad about him, saying he's Antichrist. Every president was an Antichrist before him, and it's just upsetting. I would shake his hand every morning if I could. He's a great person. God loves him, and he is going to keep this country safe, whether he's got to put his boot down once or twice. That's what's got to happen, and I'm going to leave it at that.
And the Republican line in Virginia Beach. Sorry, Strattonville, Pennsylvania. Glenn, you're on the air.
Hi, how you doing? Thank you for taking my call today. We've got a lot of people in this country with a lot of messed up thinking, so I'm just going to say what I got to say. Maduro lost the election. You talk about a dictator and a half. Let's talk about their oil. I challenge anyone out there to do the research on Venezuela oil. It's junk. It costs more to refine it than anything, okay? Now, the people of Venezuela, look at them. Are you showing videos of them on the streets celebrating, tearing down all Maduro posters, burning them? They're happy. They're celebrating in the streets. This was all about the drugs coming into our country, not the oil. And last but not least, he's a socialist. This is why the Democrats are really upset, because another socialist crony was taken down. A dictator socialist crony was taken down. The Democrats can't stand it. And I'll tell you why the Democrats weren't notified this was going to happen, because they're known to leak things.
All right. And this is what President Trump has posted on Truth Social. Nicolas Maduro on board the USS Iwo Jima. And it shows here Nicolas Maduro, he's in sweats. He's got blindfolds over his eyes, and he's got a bottle of water in his hands. This is the only picture it looks like that we've got of him. So that's on President Trump's Truth Social post. Virginia Beach, Virginia, independent line. Is it Nolak?
Yes, this is Nolak. Yes, I'm independent, also retired military. I lean more towards the right, so I'd be, 20, 30 years ago, I'd probably side Democrat. But, no, I just common sense approach. This is Monroe Doctrine 101. You can't be a communist dictator in our hemisphere. It just is what it is. We had the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1963. It's the same premise. It's the drugs, the Tren de Aragua, and you can't flood our country with millions of people. I think Mexico is watching out, is looking over their shoulder now. This is an example of how military can be used as a scalpel rather than just a club. And where I support this, I would really like to see him bring peace between Russia and Ukraine, because the outcome of that is going to be the same regardless. Russia's going to keep what they have. All we're doing is sending people into a meat grinder. I like what he did here, and I would like him to bring peace to the rest of the world.
So when you mentioned Mexico, would you be okay with military action against Mexico?
If it's done the way that this operation was done, quick action, people in and out. I don't I don't want to see basically where it's anarchy and chaos in the street, but it seems that their leaders pretty much look at us as a joke. They flood us with millions of people. They just let it happen. And I understand that they were pretty much given a green light by the last administration. But if it's done like this and there's an actual plan for a succession where you see Venezuela, Maduro clearly did lose an election. If it was something where the people are actually supporting it, which you've been seeing in the last 3 or 4 weeks in Mexico, people are fed up over there. Mexico is artificially suppressed in the same way that Venezuela was. They've never had freedom in that part of the country, so they don't know really what to subscribe to. If we gave them a plan of, hey, this is what your country could be, I would definitely support it. Not if it's just going to be like we're going to remove a dictator and then whatever fills a vacuum. No, I would not.
Roger, Newport, Kentucky, Democrat. Go ahead, Roger.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. First of all, just to the last caller, I think the people in Mexico and Venezuela would disagree. They definitely have had freedom and liberty at some point in their past. As a Democrat, I fully am glad that Maduro's gone. This is good for the Venezuelan people, but this could have been done in a better way. This could have been done with coordination by regional partners. We also could have relied on the UN, and we could have gotten approval from Congress to do this before executing it. Overall, though, I hope that this works out for Venezuelans. Thank you. That's all I got.
Angela, Abbottstown, Pennsylvania, Republican. Hi, Angela.
Hi, I'm not from Abbottstown. I'm from Chambersburg. Sorry.
But still Pennsylvania, right?
It is still Pennsylvania, ma'am.
Okay.
I just want to say, first of all, I live in the greatest country in the world, okay? And I sat here and for the last half hour, and I've listened to so many people tear down our president and what he's doing. You know, Abraham Lincoln once said, a country divided cannot stand. And I look at this country, and it saddens me that we live in the greatest country in the world, but the people are divided. It's time Democrats, Republicans come together, okay? We live in the greatest country in the world, and we put down our president. I'm proud of our president. Yeah, he's brash at times. Yeah, he's mouthy at times, but I trust him, and I believe that he's doing what's best for my freedom, okay? If anybody does not appreciate their freedoms, then you shouldn't live in the United States. If you want to live in a socialistic country where you're controlled, where your guns are taken away, if you want to live in a place like Venezuela, please be my guest and leave, because you know what? If you don't appreciate your country, you cannot be a true American.
All right. And the Associated Press has this. Several callers have brought up the pardoning of the ex-Honduran president. It says that Trump's dramatic action against Maduro is the polar opposite of the clemency he granted to former Honduran President Hernandez. Trump in December pardoned Hernandez, though he was sentenced to 45 years in prison for helping drug traffickers to safely move hundreds of tons of cocaine north through his country to the U.S. Hernandez, who enjoyed support from officials in the first Trump administration, was convicted by a U.S. jury in New York, which Maduro is now set to face. When asked in an interview with Politico about the pardon, Trump said, quote, "I don't know him, and I know very little about him," but added that he was told that Hernandez, quote, was set up. The country deals in drugs, like probably you could say that about every country, and because he was the president, they gave him like 45 years in prison. That's a quote from President Trump. Patrick is calling us from Columbus, Ohio, Independent Line. Go ahead.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I just want to bring up a point no one's really talked about. Venezuela has one of the world's largest gold deposits. There was a Canadian company called Crystal X International Corporation. There's been multiple legal fights over this reserve going back and forth. But I just want to bring up that point that there's a lot of resources there. I hope the best for Venezuela and the United States of America. But I just want to bring that up.
And here's Michael in Smyrna, Georgia, Republican. Go ahead, Michael.
Well, I think it's a great day for the U.S. and a great day for the world. We've got a dictator who basically ran the country into the ground. Venezuelans have been trying to leave into the U.S. and other countries for years under the Chavez regime as well as Maduro regime. And so I think that the world should take notice that President Trump is doing exactly what he was supposed to do, and that is restore peace to the world. I don't understand some of these other callers that have been calling and trying to slam Trump for not doing his job. I don't see how you have sympathizers with a dictator who has basically starved his people and ran drugs across into the U.S. and other countries and think, well, that's a bad thing that Trump did. We should be basically rejoicing in what happened today, and I'm excited to hear what Trump has to say about it. But I think the rest of the world, and the caller you just mentioned talked about Mexico, I think Mexico should really be watching as well, because they should be helping us. Mexico has been a corrupt country for decades, and they have basically been turning a blind eye to all the drugs that have been either manufactured there, fentanyl coming in from China, and we have to stop all this. But Mexican and other countries turn a blind eye because they're corrupt, and we know that. So we're taking out these corrupt leaders one by one, and I can only congratulate Trump for doing that. That's what I wanted to say.
All right, Michael, let's go to the line for Democrats. Atlantic Beach, Florida. Sarah. Good morning, Sarah.
Hi there. I think it's really naive to think that taking down one person is going to have any impact at all on drugs in the United States. People aren't doing drugs because it's available. We're doing it because we're broken. We have no money. Everything is difficult, and that's there. We have mental health crises. We have health crises, and so I don't understand how America first, instead of focusing on what can we do to get to the root of these problems and make it so that people don't feel the need to do drugs, right? It's just one person is not going to stop the flow of drugs into the United States. It's not going to slow down the overdose deaths at all.
Sarah, we are going to go ahead and end the show here because President Trump has approached the podium. Thanks for watching, everybody.